Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Fire Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee. Could I start off by asking for apologies for absence?
Apologies for absence received from Assemblymember Bacon, for whom Assemblymember Boff is substituting, and Assemblymember Eshelani.
Thank you. Could I ask everyone to check their electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions? Members of the public might like to follow at London Assembly on Twitter and use the hashtag #AssemblyFire and hashtag #LondonFire for this meeting. Declarations of interest. Are there any other declarations?
No.
Thank you. Items 3, 4 and 5 I'll take together, which is to note the committee's membership, terms of reference and standing delegation. Can we note those?
No.
Thank you. And minutes of the previous meeting. Can we agree the minutes of the committee meeting on the 28th of March 2019?
Agreed.
Agreed. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions?
Noted.
And then can we come to the main item of today, which is the London Safety Plan. And before I welcome our guests, can I firstly ask members to agree the areas for consideration as set out in paragraph 4.1 of the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. So can I welcome our guests, no strangers, Fiona Twycross, Deputy Mayor for Fire and Resilience, and Dany Cotton, London Fire Commissioner. Welcome. We've also got in attendance Sue Budden, Director of Corporate Services, Susan Ellis-Bunce, Assistant Director, Strategy and Risk, and Richard Mills, Deputy Commissioner. So I'll start off by asking about some of the key highlights in the safety plan, which of course is 2 years old now, halfway through its term of office, for want of a better word, and I think it seems a good time to review it. So perhaps I could start by asking, 2 years on, what changes or additions to the plan have been made or are being considered to ensure it remains fit for purpose? Dany.
Good afternoon. So obviously halfway through the plan, we have been looking at the plan all the way through. This London Safety Plan was more of an enabling plan. Obviously the previous London Safety Plan had a number of specific commitments, primarily the reduction in numbers of fire stations. This plan is far more about future-proofing what we want to do as a fire and rescue service. As obviously, as you're all aware, Grenfell Tower coming as early as it did in the plan did make us review some areas of the plan, and quite rightly we took the decision in conjunction with members that it was not a suitable time to enact some of the parts of the plan. You know, any alternative crewing options or anything that might look like a reduction in fire cover for London, you know, before we get the outcome of Grenfell Tower inquiry, we thought would not be appropriate. So we have put those plans on hold. However, what the plan did give us was the ability to look a lot at our fire safety regulation and to increase the contact we have with public, both the business and the public, about making them safer. And lots of parts of that plan have been coming along. We're really pleased with how those are working. You know, as you'll all be aware, the Grenfell Tower has given a huge additional workload burden to the fire safety activity teams. A lot more focused work that we've been undertaking, but because of the flexibility in the plan, it has allowed us to do that. But it is something we are constantly reviewing, because the main focus of the plan, you know, is about ensuring that we are looking and recognising the risk to Londoners. One of the main things is about opening the big red doors, and we're really pleased with the progress we're making about opening up our fire stations. But we will continue to look into the plan. We're pleased to say that only 3 of the actions are reporting amber at the moment, and we have got an action plan in place for those. But overall, we think, you know, it's very welcome that we look at the plan at the moment. We feel substantially the plan is fit for purpose, and we will continue to work towards achieving the rest of the aims.
Thanks for that, and we'll be looking in detail at some of those headlines. But perhaps I could start by just asking, what's the biggest challenge and what's the biggest opportunity?
So I think that probably one of the biggest challenge at the moment would be responding to the Grenfell inquiry whilst trying to maintain core business for London Fire Brigade for me. But I think that the plan allows us to do that. It's very much for me about ensuring that our firefighters can be the very best they can be to protect the communities of London. And I think that a lot of the work we're doing with communities at the moment is demonstrating that. I also think the plan and the work we're doing around regulated fire safety is giving us enhanced opportunity to reinforce our messages, especially in relation to fitting of sprinklers and retrofitting of sprinklers in building and the fire safety work we're doing. So I think those are great opportunities for us working in conjunction not only with the plan but with the additional burdens that have come online as well.
Okay, Fiona, perhaps I could ask you about performance management. for the LSP,
Yes, of course.
and how you hold the Commissioner to account on the commitments in the plan.
Okay, thank you. We have a robust process in place to track performance against the London Safety Plan. And as I've mentioned at previous meetings, as part of the new governance arrangements, I hold a monthly Deputy Mayor's Fire and Resilience Board where I'm updated on the most recent performance trends and discuss these with the Commissioner and other senior officers. And actually, we also do this with the Mayor's Chief of Staff. We had a meeting this morning to discuss the financial performance and performance more generally. So we do track performance, and we do have a number of ways we do this. I think it's been really important, and we've stressed the importance of making sure that we don't allow good relationships become cosy relationships, in terms of making sure that my role is partly to do with holding the Commissioner and the Fire Brigade to account. And so with the monthly meetings I have, we look at specific performance issues on a regular basis. So, for example, at the past 2 meetings, we've had board discussions on a range of issues that are mentioned in the LSP, for example, on increasing workforce diversity. I think you've raised issues around inspection regime at care homes, and I've also recently had updates on the progress on procuring the new fireboats and the new training centre at Croydon. So these are things that we look at a general level, at sort of surface level in terms of general performance, but then I'll have periodic updates on specific issues. And then on a less formal level, I also have weekly meetings with the Commissioner. I visit control on a regular basis to talk to staff and have visions on updates on vision. And I regularly meet other senior staff to discuss areas of work, most of which on some level do link back into the London Safety Plan, as well as obviously I know others in the room also do this, including members of the committee, but visiting fire stations is also quite a good way of getting a sense check of how things are going.
Firefighters are never slow in coming forward.
No, they're not, and actually it's very helpful.
Okay. One of the areas where we're behind the curve, as it were, is flood response capability. So perhaps, Dany, you could tell us what you're doing to address this.
Yes, so quarter 4, we've reached some significant milestones in the project. So we now have 9 rescue recall responders who are assessed and are currently on courses to do with flood rescue boat operations. So we have the specialist officer rescue team now in place. We're pleased to say that we've now got the flood barriers. Over 200 metres of those are now available online through our operational support units. Down to the detail of we now have the new specialist fleet of 142 ejector pumps, which we've got the specialised training for, not only for serving firefighters, but in our firefighter development courses. And we've got familiarisation that's been rolled out to all our technical rescue advisors as well. So we're making steady progress now with the flood response, which I'm very pleased about, because as we're aware, that's ever increasing demand on our need at the moment.
When will you be up to scratch?
Yes, we will be.
When?
Mr Mills? He's going to assure me. It's only been in post for 5 weeks, but he has the answer.
Good afternoon. So the reason it's being reported at Amber, as the Commissioner has alluded to, is that whilst we have 9 rescue recall responders, there are ongoing discussions around secondary contracts with Fire Brigades Union. We have been working very closely with our legal department to look at variation in contracts rather than secondary contract, and that is proving to be successful. As a result of that, we are running a rolling advertising campaign to encourage firefighters to come and be recall responders. It is very much based on the take-up. As you're aware, there has been issues with secondary contracts, both at a national level and with London Region. We're hopeful that by having a variation in contracts and taking into account the recent finding around the Welsh findings around secondary contracts and whether it's pensionable or not, that we will encourage more people to join part of that national response capability.
Okay, thank you. And another issue is the command unit replacement project. Can you tell us where you got to with that? And also, while you're doing that, one of the things I've picked up from others is the problems, some of the problems with the IT that's on the existing command unit. So if you're doing something about that as well, in the interim, it would be useful to know.
Yeah, so obviously we are well aware that there is an ongoing issue with the IT on the command units at the moment. We are fortunate in the fact that we do have a fallback position where all our officers are trained to work without the IT on the command units, although it provides enhanced capability. When it doesn't work up to scratch, we do have the ability to continue with our command functions without any issue. It can be a hindrance, but because we do have as a regular event, we train for that so that, you know, we are aware of that. With regards to the replacement of the command units, obviously we've been in conversation with our suppliers, Babcock's, and it's not actually part of their provision to provide the software. What we want to make sure is that, what I really want to make sure this time is we have been known in the past London Fire Brigade to want to be too bespoke around our requirements that can cause us issues in the future. So this is about making sure we have the right software to fit in with the hardware of the command units for them to be available and working together and not overcomplicate issues. So steady work's being made, but as you're aware, the procurement of some software can take longer, and it is about making sure we have the right software that is the right functionality that works in conjunction. But the work to provide the command units, the actual hardware and the vehicles themselves is continuing with Babcock's.
So effectively there's two issues. Number one is replacement of the vehicles.
Yes.
Number two is the IT.
Yes.
So where are we with the procurement of the vehicles?
So the vehicle procurement process is still continuing, so that's not being held up by the software. That's going through the process at the moment, which will then go out to tender. That Babcock's have that fully entrained at the moment, and it is just about us then getting the right software to be in place to go on the vehicles.
Okay, then coming to the software, is the idea to have a separate contract for maintenance of the software apart from Babcock's, or are Babcock's going to subcontract it, or how's it going to work?
I don't have the detail of that. Rich, do you have a... Yeah.
So the command unit replacement project, in relation to some of the areas the Commissioner has spoken about, so we're very mindful of the ULEZ compliance issues. So the actual vehicle is being out and tendered through Babcock Critical Services. The hardware and the software for the vehicle are being tendered for separately. Because of the size of the contract, we've got to go through the ODU notice for that. We recognise that in order to get the right solution for the longevity, we are more than likely going to go for a cloud-based technology rather than have heavy hardware where we are now. In doing so, the way in which the contract is proposed to be handled is that it will be a single point of contact, so we will have the hardware and software managed through the Babcock contract. That is still very much open for wider conversation because we are going through that tendering process. In relation to your question regarding the current hardware capability, so as the Commissioner has said, that all officers and command unit staff are trained to work off of whiteboards as well as hardware software. Came from an incident this morning where we were doing just that as well as utilising the hardware and software capability. What we have done is, in recognising that things have moved on in the last 10 years, we've introduced a range of laptop capability that plugs into the command unit's current capability, updated the printers as well as all the other measures for the current fleet, recognising that if the tendering process is delayed in any way for the hardware software, we can then transpose that into the new ULEZ compliant vehicle. So I am reasonably confident that with the help of Babcock Critical Services and through our contracts department, that we will have a new vehicle that will be emission compliant, and that the current hardware and software capability will be put in there as an interim measure until such time as that second part of the contract can get negotiated and settled.
So what's the timescale for the vehicles and the timescale for the new IT?
So we're going out to tender at the moment. We are aiming for the ideal deadline as it is obviously when our licence for ULEZ, which I believe is October. So we are mindful of that for the vehicle. The hardware, software, I'll need to get back to you with specific details on that. I'm very mindful that obviously this is televised, so I need to be careful what I'm saying around tendering processes as well. But I'm quite happy to look into that in more detail and provide you a written response.
Yeah, thank you. And the third area is the emergency services network. Grins all round, or if that's the right way of putting it, which is a long and sorry story, being way behind. And the Public Accounts Committee were actually looking at it yesterday. And some of the evidence that's been put to the PAC was that the proposed new system doesn't have the same coverage geographically as the existing airwave system. The incidental coverage, the written evidence to the committee was, will be greatly reduced. Areas benefiting from incidental coverage will be greatly reduced, and therefore users' experience of coverage will be detrimentally affected. Anything to say?
Well, I would say that that will not be suitable for the use of emergency services network, because it has to provide full coverage across London, and for our capability to be able to not only communicate between ourselves and with our control room, but with other emergency services. So I would sincerely hope that no such thing is introduced until they've resolved those issues, because obviously it's clearly terribly important for the emergency services to be able to communicate fully, especially at peak demand times of operational incidents. So obviously we will continue to work and supply the information we can, but it will be vitally important to us that there's full functionality before we will be able to accept use of the new system.
Yeah, well, this was the written evidence from the National Fire Chiefs Council to the PAC. I haven't seen the oral evidence yet, but that does sound quite serious, in that Airwave apparently has incidental coverage simply because of the way it's built, whereas the new system will do what it says but nothing beyond it.
Well, I would find that disappointing and not exactly progress if that is the case. So I hope that that will be improved and updated before it is brought online. But it's obviously many years yet before we anticipate seeing it live.
How many years?
Oh, I'd like to say many years, but it's 2022 has been an estimated date now. But that's the date by the project. You know, I would like to hope it will be fully functional, and that's more important than the actual delivery date at the moment. And in the meantime, the Airwave contract has been extended, so we'll continue to use that and provide communication.
Okay, and then progress against the three aims has been a bit mixed. What are the main areas where you think performance needs to be improved?
So obviously one of the major areas of concern for me is still around sickness absence, and that is a piece of work that, as you know, we've undertaken a review of the sickness absence policy, which is due to come to through Directorate boards to myself at Commissioners Board in the next 2 months, and once we've done full consultation with the unions as well, because obviously they were heavily involved in the new policy, they're in agreement with us that we need to make changes, and we need to, you know, support people in their ability to return to work following sickness absence. So that's a serious concern for me. We obviously are also still at the highest level of sickness absence and depression, so the level of that still concerns me, and we are putting a number of interventions still in place to address mental health issues. I was very pleased to see the launch of our United Minds network, which is a staff support network specifically set up by people in response to issues around mental health, and we've already got a large number of people who are actively involved in that, and we will continue to work both with our counselling and trauma team and with our internal medical providers to make sure we're supporting people. But I think it's very important for me that we recognise that where people are off long-term sick, that we need to provide the right support for them to be able to return to work, because the longer they're absent, as we know, the more difficult it is for them to return to work. Obviously, one of the other challenges that I'm disappointed around has been around our recruitment for the 2018 campaign, but I'm also very pleased to say that the 2019 campaign that we very recently launched has paid some really great dividends, not least of all by the great work that our outreach team have done. And that meant that when we did the application, we've done a much smaller level of application to enable us to process those applications in a timely fashion. With the last recruitment round, we attracted over 6,500 applications, which took a very long time to process, and we lost very good candidates, we suspect, throughout that, because purely the lack of contact time with them. This time we closed it at 650 applicants, of which I'm really pleased to say that we've had a much higher proportion of both women and BAME applicants, and we will of course be very closely tracking them through the whole recruitment process.
Okay, and just on recruitment, where are we vis-à-vis the establishment?
Aim to be online by the end of June.
Okay, thanks. And then the last question from me. You mentioned earlier on that I've been going on about care homes and fire safety in care homes, and it's good to see the number of fires going down, but in 2017, 51 were issued with an enforcement notice, and 498 were given notice of deficiencies, and Assistant Commissioner Daly saw this as the tip of the iceberg. What are you doing to address premises where vulnerable people live?
That's obviously one of our key priorities at the moment. You know, quite rightly, there's been a focus on high-rise following Grenfell, as they're right and appropriately, but we mustn't lose sight of properties where vulnerable people are living, and those are very high risk to us. So we carried out in 2018 an intensive inspection of 177 care homes. We were somewhat shocked and horrified by the results of those. 57% of those inspected homes received formal notification. That's an appallingly high number, and it obviously raised great concerns. These are places where people place their loved ones, their dearly beloved, who are vulnerable, and they think they'll be safe in those. The fact that that many number of them had deficiencies is truly shocking to us. We're now working obviously with those care homes and the Care Quality Commission. We've written to all of them to express our concerns, and in all 1,300 care homes in London will receive an enhanced inspection in 2019 and 20, and we will revisit the ones that we've given the inspection notices to. It remains an absolute key priority because any fatal fire in those homes is, should never be happening, because those are our most vulnerable people.
So you're going to inspect every home over the next 12 months?
You are indeed, yes, definitely.
Thank you. Okay.
Just got one quick question, is that clear?
Anyway.
Okay.
Andrew as well.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You mentioned the Croydon Training Centre. Where are we with the procurement of that?
So the Croydon Training Centre, we're really pleased by the plans that we now have in place that involve, instead of some of the more extensive building work, the redevelopment work we're doing of the current PEG building. So we are now, the anticipated completion date is 2022 for the full build. That includes the new high-rise facility. But we've got excellent new plans that I'm really pleased with that enhance the training facilities we've got there at a reduced cost.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just say that on that, because the plans have changed since it came to our FIPA, it might be something that members might want an update on, a briefing on.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mine was just coming back to the issue about the care homes, and there was a care home in Tooting that was fined £105,000 earlier this month for fire safety failings, and I wondered if you could tell us how many care homes have actually been issued with fines. I mean, Andrew went through the figures for the number that have been issued with enforcement notices and a notice of deficiencies, but how many have actually been fined?
So I haven't got those numbers to hand, but I can provide you with an updated report on those that have been fined.
I should have said, if that's not something that you do have to hand, we'd be very grateful to receive that, because obviously that's actually at the top of very much at the peak of the iceberg in terms of the worst conditions, I assume,
absolutely.
who are being fined.
Yeah, and obviously our priority is to work closely with them now to ensure they don't have those levels of deficiency to reach that. But obviously where they have tragically, like the Tooting fire, result in a fatality, then it's absolutely right the fines are issued, because that does send a message, and it's very clear about our intent. So we can provide you with that data.
Thank you very much. That'd be very helpful. Thank you, Andrew.
So, Susan, on helping make London safe.
Okay, thank you. To both of you, really, what criteria does the London Fire Brigade use to identify vulnerable households and individuals?
So obviously one of the main things that we are working with is our local boroughs, and we're making sure that we're working with all partners to identify vulnerable people. So we've been doing a lot of joint work both with blue light partners and local authority partners to identify people at risk. So we've had an increased level obviously of reporting of things like hoarding, which has been one of the key areas of concern for us. So we've actually done work to make sure that where hoarding has been identified by any blue light partner, that home fire safety referrals are given to us. We can then do the visit to the premises and try and issue both guidance support and make sure that things like smoke alarms are fitted in those premises. So a lot of it is about awareness raising, because we are obviously in the local community quite regularly. We are identifying those people, and it is through not only our programmed home fire safety visits, but our interventions through operational incidents and through regular inspections and just being out and about. And part of our issue about opening our big red doors to the fire station is about trying to attract isolated vulnerable people in the community, to get them to come into the fire stations. As you'll be aware, a number of our fire stations have had tea parties and meals for older people. Acton had a very successful one recently. Through that we can make those links. A lot of those vulnerable people in the community are terribly isolated and don't have those connections, but it's also recognising that a lot more people are being cared for in normal residential properties now and not going into care homes. So it's making sure we have the links with the care providers, whether that's through a provision by a local authority, a private provision, or by family members or friends. So it's about tying up all those links together to make sure that people are reported to us and we can take the steps to make them as safe as possible.
Yeah, and I've been to some of them, and I thought I was invited because I was a councillor, but obviously because I was elderly. At the recent London Fire Summit, it was suggested that the London Fire Brigade have representatives on local authority safeguarding boards to help identify vulnerable people and work on policies to prevent fires in vulnerable households. Is that something you can take forward as well, with people sitting on those safeguarding boards?
Absolutely. Safeguarding is something that we've seen a massive increase of, and that we've provided training to all of our firefighters and officers so they can identify safeguarding issues, not only adult safeguarding but child safeguarding issues, and flag them and make those referrals. But if we can sit on those boards, then we're fully embedded in those local communities to understand that risk and to be able to respond to that risk.
Are you getting referrals from firefighters when they're actually inputting the fire alarms in?
Yeah, we get a large number of those. So one of the things that we train our firefighters to do is to look out for signs of vulnerability and safeguarding issues, and we get regular referrals coming through those that go into our local referral team to make sure that we are, where we identify anything, and we'd rather our firefighters acted on an overly cautious nature if they thought there was a risk and made those referrals, because we are quite often sometimes the only people that go into those premises and the only people that have that point of contact with those vulnerable people.
I absolutely agree. I mean, we were doing this years ago. Can you tell me though, do you have any problems with the unions, with the firefighters doing that?
No, not at all. The unions are fully on board and recognising the fact that protecting vulnerable communities in London is one of our key focuses, and they're very keen for the firefighters to support the agenda.
Well, that's really good news. Thank you. How does the Fire Brigade's community safety strategy support and add value to the commitments in the London Safety Plan?
So obviously our prevention activities always form a key part of our London Safety Plan, and through that we're very pleased to see the large reduction in number of fires. We're conducting over 76,000 home fire safety visits in London. Our prevention work is continuing to target the most vulnerable people in our society, but we're now expanding that not only from the risk to fire, but obviously risks to different areas, such as, we're really keen on youth intervention, especially, at the moment, the level of youth crime in London and vulnerability from gangs and knife crime. So actually being able to target young people as well to try and make interventions. We've been doing a really high-profile issue around water safety recently, which you may have seen the really high-profile launch of this week involving the Royal Family, which we're really pleased about because, the enhanced risk from drowning and also from people entering floodwater, and just understanding the risks associated with water, and a lot more issues around community health as well. So we're trying to target it on a number of different levels and, just raise it up, not from just talking about fire, but talking about greater risks to people in our community.
When you put, because the putting in of smoke alarms has been going on for quite some time now, do we have a list that you go back to? Because obviously the batteries run out or wear out. Do you have any list of the ones that were done a while ago? Or
so whilst we have that, obviously the other thing is that people move around. People just do things like decorating and take things off. So it is about ensuring that, but it is for us very much about targeting the vulnerable people first, and it is, changing focus on how we do that, because, it is sometimes those people that we might not have been able to reach in the first place, or that we might have visited a long time ago but have, moved. So it's about working with our local authority partners to try and identify those people as our key focus, and then the wider scale offering of the fire safety visits. And obviously we've got our new community safety and prevention strategy, which is focusing on core delivery of safest global city, and actually doing that widening part of that programme for me, which is really important.
Great, excellent, thank you. In terms of responding to planning applications, how successful is LFB at responding within the designated consultation period?
So obviously, as you'll be aware, some of our issues around responding have been the same people who respond to our planning applications are people who are dealing with some of our really high-risk fire safety activity at the moment. So whilst we have seen a dip in the level of some of our response in that planning activity, we are trying to recruit back up to make sure we have the right numbers of people to respond to that. But obviously our people who are dealing with our fire safety regulation work at the moment are having an ever-increasing burden on them, not only from the high-rise task force activity, but from our care home activity as well. As you'll be aware, there have been an increase in the number of types of cladding being tested at the moment. That we see will also see a spike in buildings which we need to now visit and prioritise. So it is about balancing the priorities of all those works.
How much do you think notice is the fire brigade taken when you do responses to these planning applications? Do you feel that your comments are noted properly?
No, nowhere near enough. I think that, you know, the disappointment that we have in the level of response to our recommendations, for instance, around both fitting and retrofitting of things like sprinklers in buildings and automatic fire suppression systems, very, very disappointing level of response to that. We provide recommendations, in something like less than 5% of those recommendations are taken up. I think that's shocking statistics, bearing in mind we know that the cost of fitting sprinklers at initial build stage of a building is so cheap, and yet can provide such a good service. It's Sprinkler Week this week. We are really actively trying to push forward to continue our campaign that we've been pushing for so long, because we know sprinklers save lives.
Yeah, and we have been pushing it for years and
Yes.
years. If you make comments on certain planning applications and you really feel strongly about it and it's completely ignored, are you able to elevate that to anybody or anywhere?
Not at the moment, unfortunately. You know, we can provide the recommendations, but they are recommendations, which is why we want those fire safety measures to become mandatory and not optional, and we need government backing to do that.
Okay, all right, well, you have certain of us really support that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think you only need, just following on from Susan's question, presumably the decisions on this have been made by local planning committees in the boroughs. Have you done any educational exercises with planning committees to explain the importance of the sort of things you recommend in general terms, so that when a recommendation comes from the brigade as part of a planning submission, they actually know what you're talking about and why?
Yeah, so we have our fire safety teams have been doing that work, because it is about education piece as much as anything else. Whether or not we've done enough or have the resources to do enough, I think probably not at the moment because of the competing priorities we have. But that's why we're doing so much, you know, widespread London-wide campaigning as well to try and reinforce that message. But, you know, I would say there's always more work we could do to try and assist with providing education opportunity.
Well, I mean, that must be a job for the borough commanders, because presumably the local authorities will take the borough commanders seriously, and it's not just the officers of the council who make recommendations, it's actually the members you need to get to make the decisions. And bearing in mind we had the local elections last year and quite a churn, it might be something to get the borough commanders onto over the next few months.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Fiona.
Thank you, Andrew. We were just talking about involvement in planning and educating people on planning committees, but obviously we've seen quite a number of residential premises, about 16,000 I think the estimate is now in London, produced, that haven't gone anywhere near the planning process at all, because they've been conversions from offices to residential using the permitted development rights arrangement. And I just wondered if you could say what you think, how can we tackle any fire issues that might arise? I've visited some of these premises, and some of them I thought frankly looked dangerous and very dodgy looking electrics and things like this. Do you think this is undermining the work that the brigade is doing around planning because of these sort of under the radar conversions that aren't going through the planning processes?
So I think that, you know, we have to focus on remembering that responsibility of those premises and the fire safety provision within them is the responsible person who is in charge of that building. We've been trying to do a lot of work with educating those people and supporting them to understand their role, especially, you know, some of the findings we've had on some of the high-rise task force we've done, that, you know, it's not just about cladding, it's about the fire safety provisions inside a building, and where, you know, we've seen where a lot of modifications have been made and people have not given due consideration to the enhanced risk that poses. For instance, if people, you know, don't adhere to fire separation by drilling holes through to provide different services, and they're then not fire stopped. So this is about a whole education piece, but it's about those people understanding their responsibility, and we want to go far more to make sure it's not just about looking at the building, but the people in that building. Because, you know, you might be somebody who lives on the 18th floor of a building who is perfectly fit and well and capable and able to leave a premises, but if you're a person on the 18th floor who is bedbound and oxygen dependent, you know, everyone's told don't use the lift in the event of a fire. What's the risk assessment for that individual person? So it isn't just about the building, the safety in the building, it's about the people that are living in that building and having people-focused risk assessments as well as building risk assessments.
Sure, no, but I was just wondering what impact you thought that permitted development might be having, and obviously that work with the people who are managing or owning those buildings then becomes very important. How much of that kind of work has the brigade been able to undertake up until now?
So I would say once again it's about balancing our resources against what we are dealing with at the moment and the enhanced workload of the fire safety inspection teams, because clearly at the moment we are focusing on both high-rise premises and care premises, and you know, as and when they get flagged to us, so if people raise issues, of course we respond to that with an inspection, but sometimes it's unknown buildings, and because of the vast array of buildings in London, you know, we are simply not able to inspect every single building. So where we're not notified or where we're unaware of them, that's where the risk is.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I mean, obviously the brigade is quite stretched at the moment from what you're saying. I think this is an area that has, as I said, potentially been going under the radar. I've certainly seen some really difficult arrangements, and I wonder whether we've got over the sort of the current situation with the big focus on care homes and post-Grenfell activity, whether this is an area that maybe the brigade should be trying to focus on.
Can I add? I think
Sure.
that one, you talked about something going under the radar. I think for a very long time, fire safety has effectively gone under the radar on a general basis. So it's it can be tempting to pick out one sort of building or one type of premises, but actually it's the whole fire regulation piece that we need to address and make sure that actually government is investing appropriately in the prevention work, in making sure that they are taking forward some of the recommendations from Hackett and looking at what recommendations from Hackett on the high-rise residential premises would also be relevant for other types of building. But I think that every time we focus simply on one area of fire safety, we miss all the others. It's the same way that sort of the brigade was concerned that people were overly focused on cladding. Now clearly cladding is an issue. I think it's very important that that flammable cladding, I mean, why on earth was flammable cladding ever allowed on buildings? But if you over focus on one aspect or one thing that could go wrong or has gone wrong, in some ways you're almost starting to let other people or other types of premises or other issues off the hook. So it's about making sure that there's a holistic view, that we do look at, as you say, sort of, I mean, I've seen some shocking examples of some of the buildings that have gone through on permitted development as well, but actually it has to be a holistic approach, but the brigade has limited resources and has to prioritise the resources they have to the correct approach was to look at the high-risk buildings.
I think that's a very well-made point. Amongst his many huge mistakes, David Cameron oversaw in 2010 the bonfire of much of health and safety regulations, which he described as red tape. And I think that was a huge mistake and has actually left us in the position that we're in now. And I really do hope that government decides to re-implement some of the things that were described as red tape, because actually health and safety does what they do on the tin. They provide health and safety. Andrew, I'll pass it back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, just on permitted development rights, the government proposing to expand permitted development rights, which would make things even worse. And certainly in Edgware, we had an office tower block that was converted to residential and has ACM cladding on it. So
you've raised that, and I think it's a really serious issue. So I think that's something we could potentially would be lobbying on, I think.
Okay. Now, Andrew, on firefighters in the community.
Thanks very much. Commissioner, you've talked about how you've opened the doors to the fire stations and you're getting more involved in the community, which is great. But what training has been undertaken to equip station fire crews with the technical fire and safety knowledge that they require?
So obviously we recognise the fact as part of the London Safety Plan that there's a wider role for firefighters in delivering and looking at fire safety as part of their general day-to-day job. So we're delivering training and support to stations to complete fire safety checks of premises. So fire crews will be inspecting the smaller unknown premises and known high-rise residential premises. That will improve our firefighter skills. We're going to improve that in regulatory fire safety so they get a better understanding of risks within their ground. So it's really important that they have that enhanced understanding and they're then supporting the work and leaving the specialised fire safety work to the teams of fire safety officers. They're going to receive a computer-based training package and then they're receiving face-to-face training as well. The first types we're doing are the small shops, for instance, with dwellings above. because they can obviously have high risk living above shops. So it's training firefighters to recognise those risks, especially issues around poor management, insufficient means of escape. So that's one of the target areas for them. And the other one is residential high-rise premises of 6 floors and above. Normally those ones having high-rise, having rising mains and firefighting shafts. We've had a successful trial in North East London, and it's expected that completed training will take place, will start in September and October and take about 18 months to complete.
That sounds like you are, I mean, you've assessed the training and you think it's okay. I always think there's an alarm bell when somebody says CBT training, you know, computer-based training.
The computer-based will be the first part of the knowledge and followed up by face-to-face. So the computer-based will give the background knowledge and reading and enhancement with the face-to-face training.
Right. And you're going to measure the outcomes for that? How many staff do you know that will be undertaking this training?
So we'll aim to undertake all staff. It will come in operational once 70% of the staff at any one workplace are trained. They will be able to go out and do that training, but 100% of staff we will train on fire stations.
In what period? When can we expect that to be completed?
Starting in September, October 2019, completed within 18 months. 18 months,
thank you. You talk well about how you're supporting health partners to improve some outcomes for vulnerable people. How is the success and impact of the Brigade's wider work with vulnerable Londoners measured? How do you know how much you're doing?
So we have the absolute quantitative measure of the numbers we do, so the 84,000 home fire safety visits, and we've also been running a pilot of fire safe and well visits using our community safety advisors, targeting the most vulnerable residents in pilot boroughs. They've undertaken approximately 1,000 visits to date. We've also got a referral partnership and a memorandum of understanding with London Ambulance Service, which has resulted in over 350 home fire safety visits being carried out specifically as a result of those. We've also been awareness raising with all blue light partners around dementia and hoarding and other safety issues. We've got our new community safety and prevention strategy, which is designed to actually target more vulnerable people. But you know, it's all as part of a package of work that we're undertaking, and we are very pleased to say it's a far wider reaching package of safety for people in our communities, but always with the specific focus being the most vulnerable people are the ones we should be targeting first. But by reaching out across all our partners and getting them to respond to us when they have find at-risk people, so we can then do that home fire safety intervention, we are making greater inroads into the people of London.
Your youth programme is to be admired, and what discussions are taking place between the Brigade's health and youth teams to work together in the future?
So the first thing I would like to do is do a shameless thanks and plug to the Chair for the work he's done around securing our additional funding for our cadet programmes to ensure that we have a cadet programme in each borough. So massive thanks for that. It's greatly appreciated, and we are absolutely so proud of our cadet programme. To be able to roll that out across all our boroughs is genuinely a great joy for me, because we absolutely know the difference those cadets make, and it makes the lives of those young people. For us, it's about not only the cadets, but it's also around working together with other blue light partners. One of our activities, Crossfire, at the moment, has developed a new workshop about exploitation of children selling drugs, the County Lines project. So we're working very closely on that to make sure we can link into those vulnerable young people. We're also, working with the Met around knife crime and what we can do to help support those. But we're also recognising that we need to carry on working with young people in general, so around not only the prevention agenda, but around monitoring things like arson and deliberate fire setting, because that still does become trends, especially during school holiday periods, unfortunately. They can have a devastating impact to community. Deliberate fires, especially where they result in loss of property and ultimately loss of life, have massive impacts on local communities. And it is about that awareness raising. We've got a number of other activities: the Prison Me No Way, Junior Citizens, Safe Drive Stay Alive. All those are targeting our high risk young people in our communities. But we of course continue with our programmes of visiting not only high risk but low and medium risk schools as well by our firefighters to make that point of contact.
You, however, have missed your target on delivering fire and prevention safety measures to children. You originally wanted to do 100,000. I believe you've not achieved that. What are you going to be doing to address the shortfall?
Well, it's actually the fact we're counting the wrong things. So we've been only counting one specific measure rather than counting all of our interactions. So, for instance, the activities such as Crossfire, Junior Citizens, Prison Me No Way, Safe Drive Stay Alive aren't currently counted in our numbers of impact of young people, although clearly they are. And our visits to low and medium risk schools aren't counted. So we're making sure that all the brigade work that interacts with young people will be part of our Q1 performance reporting next time, so that we can actually report on the direct interventions we're having with young people, not just those ones that we were counting previously, which were life, JFIS, cadets and visit to high risk schools.
And do you feel that that will be a better representation of the work that you're doing with
Absolutely, because that covers our wide remit of interactions with young people, not just those specific projects.
I'm fascinated that one of the areas that you're covering with young people in the sort of health programme that you've got is childhood obesity. I'd be very grateful if you could write to me after the meeting with what the programme is and what outcomes you were looking at, because it's something that interests me particularly. The London Safety Plan talks about collaboration between emergency services as well as being in the community. What work has been undertaken has been conducted to share sites with the other emergency services?
So whenever we do any development of our sites, we look at opportunities where we can share sites with other blue light partners, and sometimes it's easier to work on smaller low-level projects to make sure that, you know, sometimes if we try and do something right across any of our estates, it becomes a very complex project and you never deliver on it, whereas small local interventions are far better. So we have opportunities where we have LAS sharing some of our sites, so the cycle team at Stratford, for instance, and we've got other opportunities where we've got, so for instance, I think it's police cadets we've got in at one of our premises now. So we always look at it to ensure that where there are opportunities of us being able to work together, we can support those. But we do think it's better a lot of time at the moment on doing lower level interventions, because any large project just becomes unwieldy and difficult.
Thank you for saying that, because I think the Assembly's formed the view that if you try to do everything, you sometimes end up doing nothing.
Indeed.
And so I'm pleased you said that that's going to be a local initiative. Do you see that there is some potential, for example, for police safer neighbourhood teams to be co-located?
So obviously, you know, we want to make sure where we can maximise the opportunity about increasing the safety of our people, that we can do that. There are some issues around where those want to be sited and making sure we've got the right fire station facilities for people to be able to use them, and you know, there are some ongoing issues about sharing of those properties. But for me, it's about exploring all options of where we can do blue light collaboration, and actually not just blue light collaboration, it's collaboration across the GLA where we can use any opportunity to share our sites.
So, I mean, it seems such a common sense thing to do. I just wonder why it hasn't happened. Who's held it up? What's the big sticking point?
I don't think there is an issue of someone holding it up or having a sticking point. I think that, you know, it has been a case that we've tried to do too much across the piece, and I think that if we can try local trials, that works far more successfully than trying to have one large piece. But there is an estate strategy where all of the blue light partners, when they do any establishment or looking at estates, we try and make sure that we maximise the opportunity to share those.
Is this a symptom of, or a pointer to the fact that perhaps management is too centralised if those local initiatives can't be seized?
No, I think not at all. I think that, you know, it is important that we have an overview across the of all of our estate, and we have to have a central overview and management overview on that. But we do encourage, and one of the piece of work I've been doing is about ensuring that our local borough commanders are responding to local borough needs and local risks, because, as you know, they are so wide and varied across London, and they vary so much. You know, if you look at the borough of Sutton compared to Tower Hamlets, the local community needs are entirely different. So this is about me removing some of the central sort of target focus driven work that we've done in the past to making it more local community focused and responding to local need.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for what you had to say about the cadets, by the way. And Fiona and I saw them in action a couple of weeks ago at the Canary Wharf exercise, and I commend their performance as victims. It was very realistic.
I hear they're up for a second job as working in the acting world.
Yeah. But when are the new units going to start coming out?
So we've got some online for this year. We'll have them all completed by April 2021. But yes, but they are. We've got a rollout program now, and it'll be continuous. Obviously, it's easier to support rollouts in smaller groups to ensure they've got the right staffing levels, equipment, uniform, and that kind of stuff, and to make sure we've got the right level of community volunteers involved. And I'm really pleased about how many community volunteers we're getting involved now. And, you know, linking into those people being from our local communities and then being another opportunity for recruitment and outreach work, and that's going really well.
Good, okay. And the other thing I was going to ask about the fire safe and well visits, I saw that they were subject to an evaluation which was beginning in January this year.
Yeah.
How's that evaluation got? Has it finished yet? And if so, what was the outcome?
No, so the fire safe and well visit, so the project goes on until September. We are having 2 lots of evaluation on it, one which will be done as a MOPAC evaluation, the other one we're going to invite a peer review in, but we're going to wait because obviously at the moment we are in the middle of HMI Cfos, so we don't want to clash those 2 reviews, so we'll wait till the outcome of that before we have another look at it. But we've been really pleased about how that's going. It's shown paid some really good dividends in the pilot boroughs.
Well, we now move on to David Curtin and responding in an emergency.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Yeah, so I'm going to ask you about responding in an emergency, particularly aim 2 of the plan on response and resilience. And you obviously have a huge range of incidents that you have to respond to as a fire brigade. But over the last 2 years, what action has the brigade undertaken to ensure that your response to the range of incidents is the right one whenever you attend an incident?
Yeah, so obviously, as you're aware, the last 2 years have in some ways been exceptional with some of the different incidents we've attended. But as a process, you know, we are a learning organisation. We continually strive to ensure that we are professional. We have the best support, the best training and the best equipment for our firefighters. So we have a number of different learning loops and interventions that we undertake. Following every large-scale operational incident, we first of all have something called a performance review of operations, which involves all of the firefighters involved in that operational incident coming together, talking through the incident and identifying any learning points or any particular exceptionally good points. And that can be about performance, it can be about our policies or about our equipment. Those are then fed into a database. We also have something called a performance review of command, which our officers undertake. So we'll get all the incident commanders together and talk through the incident. And once again, so that's conducted by an independent chair, and we will then pick up either points that went really well or development points, and those can be against individual incident commanders or against organisational points. So similar thing, policies, procedures, and the way we do our job. All of those are fed into a database where we identify trends. Those go into a board where the trends are looked at to identify not only what we need to improve, but what we need to educate our firefighters around, how we base our training and development, how we base our resource requirements for new equipment. But in conjunction with that, it is about horizon scanning. So, for instance, looking to see what new equipment's available, what's coming on the market, ensuring that every time we go through a process to replace any of our equipment, we're making sure that not only is it fit for purpose now, but future-proofed. You know, if you look at something, for instance, like drone technology, as you're aware, we're doing a drone pilot at the moment. You know, we have concluded that to buy a drone would not be the best use of our resources because the technology is evolving so quickly and developing. Whereas if we look potentially at something like leasing, then it means we can ensure we've always got the best capability. So it is about that horizon scanning, about teams of people. It's also about sharing our learning, not only amongst London Fire Brigade, but amongst UK Fire and Rescue Service. Obviously, I sit on the National Fire Chiefs Council. We've got national operational guidance and learning embedded in London Fire Brigade, so able to provide that support to ensure that we're fully embedded in part of that learning loop in London, you know, and making sure that we're leading the way to make sure our firefighters are the best resourced and trained and equipped they can be.
Great, thank you. Sounds fantastic. And from the performance reviews that you've done, and you must have done quite a number over the last couple of years. I mean, what have you discovered that's working well, and have you found any areas where improvements have been needed?
Yes, we'll always identify improvements. So one of the things we'll look at is to make sure that our training is up to scratch, ensure that our firefighters have got the right level of training and our incident commanders, and we're working through enhanced incident command training at the moment to ensure that our incident commanders train on a varying different number of activities. One of the things I've been very pleased about, and that's come out of a local initiative, as you'll be aware, there's a really enhanced level of acid attacks taking place in London at the moment, truly shocking levels of that, as a result of a local initiative that came out of our North East area from one fire station that responded to an acid attack and felt that people were not adequately prepared. We've now rolled out a fantastic widespread acid attack programme where we're training not only London firefighters, but we've been training transport providers to ensure that people who might come into contact with those people have got the training and understanding. So we've been working closely with not only the Met Police, but British Transport Police, City of London Police. We've been working with security companies as well to ensure that those high-risk areas, and you know, we saw a really high spike in North East London. Sadly, we're seeing that translate across the whole of London now. But that rolled out from a local initiative that's now Brigade-wide, and we're taking countrywide through the National Fire Chiefs Council. So it's responding to that risk in London and making sure that, you know, we are absolutely trained for every eventuality. And I think things like that was something that 5 years ago we'd never anticipated. So it shows our flexibility to be able to respond to that emerging risk.
Yeah. You've anticipated what I was going to ask you next, which is about your flexibility. And, you know, obviously you obviously are thinking about that and doing that and responding to new things as they come along, and very, very well. So, you know, have you explored how you can make your operational resources more flexible as well?
Yeah, and I think that for me very much is about utilising our frontline resources to make sure that not only they're fit to be able to respond, but they're conducting the right training. We've been doing some excellent no-notice exercises, so we'll get our officers together for a borough training day, and then in the afternoon they will be given a no-notice exercise. They'll be deployed to a venue and they'll undertake a training exercise. Did a large-scale one at a care home recently in North London. But it puts our, you know, it gives our firefighters and specifically our officers the ability to train in real environments to actually respond to a need and to do that. And we've had some such positive feedback, because the more realistic we can make training for our firefighters, you know, obviously not the better it is, because we've got, thank goodness, reducing fires. So we want to make sure that we're supplementing that with the right training, and we've got people available, you know, so we get people available not only who are frontline, but we take them away from the station, make sure they've got the training at our dedicated training venues, so all their basic levels of training around breathing apparatus as well are fully up to date, and they do real fire training as part of that as well.
Okay. And now, one of the things that it says specifically in the London Safety Plan is that the Brigade will conduct a review of strategic resources to make sure it fits with the priorities for delivering the service in the future. So have you made any progress on doing that review, and what are the findings of what the work you've done so far? Yes,
that's been a key piece of work. So it commenced on the 6th of March and it will be presented to my Commissioners Board in September 2019. As people are aware, the strategic resources facility where up to 21 Brigade appliances are placed on second line, so not immediately available. With an additional capacity, we can have additional 4. Those appliances on SR are still available for recall to be able to respond to operational incidents. But actually what we use that for is to enhance training, to ensure that if it's more involved training, for instance, that they're able to conduct that training without the risk of being called out during it. So especially if we want to you know, do enhanced first aid training with watches together, that kind of stuff where we don't want to be disturbed. However, in the event of a major incident, we can recall them back to duty. So we've been doing a review of that, but we're also tying it into a review of a number of other things we're doing. Obviously, the large-scale roll-to-rank programme we're doing at the moment, which will enhance the ability of our watch managers becoming station officers to train on watches. Our project we're enhancing at the moment, which is about the development of our maintenance of skills. All those will feed in together to ensure that we're utilising SR in the best way possible. One of the things that we did find early on was that sometimes people were training with stations that weren't very close to them. And whilst obviously firefighters can work with any firefighters, we do recognise that it's really important for local firefighters from local boroughs and local stations to be able to work closely together, because they're more liable to be the ones responding to an incident. So it's about making sure that SR is fit for the future, and so we'll report back on that in September, so I'm happy to bring a report back after I've got my conclusions.
Yeah, thank you. No, my final question is that obviously you have to respond to exceptional circumstances and complex operations, and you receive a couple of grants to help you with that, the New Dimensions grant and the Urban Search and Rescue grant. But there's been a slight cut in the amount of money you get from those two things. I mean, has that had any impact on you, and if so, what is it?
No, so the specific reduction to the USAR grant was in relation to the fact that London no longer hosts the National Coordination Centre that we used to have in London Fire Brigade. That's now transferred to Merseyside, so that was a reduction in 309,000, and the posts that we had that were associated with that. The Instant Response Unit grant has been reduced because there's been a remodelling of instant response units, and they're not all whole-time crewed now. Some of those are double crewed because whilst they're still available as a resource, they're not something that's used regularly on front line. So it's had absolutely no impact on us. It's just a remodelling of some of the national resilience capability.
Okay, so that was all sort of calculated in, so it hasn't affected your operations. Okay,
no, not
great.
at all.
Thank you very much.
Okay, just a couple. have you now got all the items that you put in as a sort of a shopping list after Grenfell? There's £6 million worth.
Yes, so we haven't got all of them in yet because obviously we're still waiting. We've put the order in, we're waiting for the delivery of our turntable ladders. The first one of those we expect to see in the brigade before the end of this year. In fact, I've got a visit over to the factory in October, I think it is, to check on progress, and ours will be in production at that time. So we're really looking forward to that new capability coming in. As I said, the drone project is well underway. We've been absolutely fascinated by the different use of our drones. We didn't anticipate just how much of a benefit they would be, not only to our incident commanders. This morning, for instance, members may be aware that we had a 15-pump fire, large-scale fire over in the Tottenham area, warehouse fire. So luckily, early recognition by the incident commander of the benefit of the drone, they called it on. But one of the benefits that we didn't see was that the CAA contacted us and asked us if we could fly the drone up to estimate the height of the smoke plume in relation specifically to whether it was going to impact on city airports, and then in conjunction with the police to see whether or not the smoke was then going on to affect local roads. So it's just been fascinating how much of a... And I think for incident commanders, and actually looking at the footage from this morning's drone activity on the ground, it looked quite dramatic. When you flew the drone over the top of the incident this morning, it just showed the extent of the fire. So we're really pleased how successful that's been. Obviously, we need to complete that project to look at not only the drones themselves, but how we provide them to the fire ground, because obviously there's an enhanced personnel cost of having the personnel available 24/7 on a rotating cover basis to be able to provide them. So those two are well entrenched. The other items of kit at the moment, obviously we've provided the T-shirts. We are still working, let me think. Rich, have you got a, off the top of my head, bit kit? Pass the microphone. Sorry, I'll
Smoke hoods and BA.
BA, so the BA is a much longer term project to ensure that we are making sure that we get the fit for purpose. BA is a really complicated piece of equipment, and the new technology around BA, we want to make sure that it is the best technology we have, but in conjunction with ensuring that it isn't so long-lasting that it burns out our firefighters. And we're also looking, we've now come to the conclusion that we can provide the enhanced operation, the communication technology. We can replace that before we replace the BA sets. We were initially going to replace the BA comms as part of that project, but we found a way where we can get a communication set that is compatible with our current existing breathing apparatus and will be transferable to our new breathing apparatus.
Is that Bluetooth?
Is that Bluetooth? Is it Bluetooth?
Correct.
Yes.
So
Bluetooth.
So the communication technology for breathing apparatus, some trials taking place. There are Bluetooth capabilities out there. There have been mixed reviews from other fire rescue services around Bluetooth capability and the system dropping out. The current Barry set, as we call it, we recognise that the wires that attach to it is a much more integral and effective piece, but we do recognise that the way in which they're being produced currently can cause problems for the operator. In addition to, obviously, the respiratory protection project around EDBA, there is a recognition, particularly under prevention of future deaths, recommendations previously around individuals and the physiological effects of long-term impact of someone going to an incident for a long duration. EDBA is a one-wear capability compared to standard duration, which is 2-wear, which provides an individual opportunity to rehydrate. So that's why, rather than go out and purchase something that may be subject to review in the future, we have looked at all differing delivery models of current EDBA sets, or the spare sets as it were, that aren't carried on fire appliances, as an interim measure. Once we go out to tender, there'll be new products on the market that may extend the duration of breeding apparatus, but without the physiological burden of the weight of the existing set. So that's what we're doing around EDBA. The other areas to assist the Commissioners, so the fire escape hoods have been implemented very successfully, and they've carried out a number of rescues utilising those fire escape hoods. It provides another opportunity for incident command to look at what they have on the incident ground to make a decision on how best to extricate someone. In addition to that, I think that is pretty much it. That's it from the list.
What I would say is, though, that we had the shop in Lisbon immediately after the incident, but we are going to have to look again when the inquiry does publish its Phase 1 report and look at whether there's further recommendations that might have a cost implication, but also benefit for the Brigade and the safety of Londoners.
Yeah. Okay. I think the drones are something that are going to...
The drones are very impressive.
Yes, it certainly is, and it keeps firefighters safer as well,
Yeah.
which is good. I mean, how have the changes since the Grenfell, such as the increase in fire engines from 4 to 5 as part of the LFB's predetermined attendance policy, improved response to emergencies in high rise?
So, you know, we've gone obviously one step further on from that as well, and that where we receive multiple calls to high rises, we're dispatching 8 frontline pumping appliances, and where any of those calls make reference to the outside of the building potentially being involved, we send initial attendance of 10 pumping appliances plus the officers required to support that. What we're finding that means is that, you know, for a number of those incidents, they are false alarms. You know, we get a very high level of calls, for instance, to things like barbecues on balconies, which will be described as an outside fire. However, what we have is the resources there available to tackle those in a much shorter time frame. So we are finding where there are high-rise incidents involving those, that we have got large-scale resource on scene very quickly, that is providing additional level of enhanced support. What that does mean is that, you know, sometimes it causes a little bit of alarm because people see such a large number of fire engines outside their premises, which, you know, what we want to do is try and measure that against, you know, distressing people in the journey times across London. But by providing that enhanced level of support, it does mean that where instances of fires do occur, that we have firefighting numbers on the ground available to respond.
Yeah, so do you think that was a good learning from the Grenfell?
I think so, yes, and I think it's something that enhances safety of people in high-rise. And obviously at the moment where we still have the issues with so many buildings, with not only ACM cladding, but the new types of cladding that are just being tested now, then it's absolutely right and proper that we get large numbers of resources there to respond to that need.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Just on the PDA for high-rise, have you actually had to use that number of appliances on a high-rise fire?
So we have had a couple of high-rise fires that resulted in make-ups, but I think what people do is, in recognition of the fact they've got those resources there, they will use them, whereas sometimes people might have just got by with the ones and thought we can manage with 4 or 6, but because they've got 8 pumping appliances there, they will use all 8 of them, which is great, because, you know, I think it's important that people recognise that we need to resource to the right number of appliances for the incident they're attending, and I think that we need to make sure our incident commanders are fully prepared to ask for the right number of resources and in a timely fashion.
I think if you had started a barbecue on your balcony and 10 fire engines turned up, you might be a bit embarrassed. But
yeah, yes, and I think, yes, for the people involved. And, you know, obviously we do have issues around balconies, and there are a lot of balconies now that have, like, wooden cladding on them that enables the fire to spread up through the balconies, so we get quite a lot of that. It's obviously terribly visual in London, and we receive lots of calls to those, but, you know, I think that we're trying to reinforce the message about barbecues on balconies, especially, you know, where people are using those portable barbecues straight onto wooden balconies and not realising that wood's quite flammable.
And just while we're on barbecues, last year you put out a call to tell people not to have barbecues in grasslands which have been dried out. Are you going to repeat that message this year?
I will be the barbecue Grinch again this year. I'm more than happy to be a Grinch where it comes to fire safety regarding wildland fires. Across the country, we've already seen a pretty similar level of wildland fires than we did by about July, August last year. So, you know, we know that large areas of green are very dry at the moment. We've had a number of grass fires ourselves already. Fortunately, none of a large scale, but we're seeing an increase in those. So I'll be very happy to once again be the misery point and to talk to people about not having barbecues out in public areas, you know, along with all the other messaging around discarded cigarettes and broken glass, but also an intervention around the fact we know still a number of those fires are started deliberately, and it is about ensuring that people, local authorities, take responsible action to ensure that there aren't large accumulated areas of waste dumped on those grounds, and that, you know, where they can, they make sure that they keep the levels of grassland low and all those things that stop those fire preventing. But that is a big piece of work. We've now got a wildfire tactical advisor in London Fire Brigade that we managed to poach from another fire and rescue service, I'm delighted to say, and he's putting together a training package to ensure that we've got enhanced training for our incident commanders around wildland firefighting.
And just going back to PDAs on high-rise, a couple of days ago the FBU published some quite worrying data about how poor the response is in large parts of the rest of the country, some only selling 2 pumps and so forth. Obviously not going to ask you to comment on that to a degree, except to this extent that on our neighbouring brigades where we may be called upon to provide assistance, what sort of PDAs do they have for high-rise?
Oh, I couldn't say off the top of my head, I can find out. But I know that pretty much at the moment, looking at our response across border at the moment, we are pretty even with all of our surrounding fire and rescue services in the support we provide to them compared to the support they provide to us. But I could have interest, if you'd like, be able to get the PDAs of our responding.
Well, I think that would be interesting. I mean, I like to speak to name and shame, but if they are in that league, I don't think they are in that league because I think the FBU did name names, but if they're only selling 2 pumps to a high-rise and we end up having to support them when things got out of control, that could be quite serious. Yeah. And the other thing on new kit, well, the drones, I think, are without doubt very useful. We saw that at the Lincolnshire USAR exercise, apart from anywhere else. But I put down a question about this and didn't get an exactly positive response from the Colossus robot that they used in Paris at the fire there. Are we going to look at having one of these ourselves?
I want to look at all technology. I mean, I think that, you know, if you look at our historical buildings in London, following the Notre Dame fire, I think it's very important that so as a result of that, we've written to all of our historical buildings, all of them in London, to remind them of the issues around fire safety. We're doing a piece of work with them. We have a dedicated officer embedded in our fire safety team that specifically works with, in conjunction with all of those buildings. I think there's a number of new technologies that are coming online that can assist with that. I went and saw a fire engine recently that's got enhanced capability to be able to provide large quantities of water on a greater throw range. So I think it's really important, as a number of packages, we look at all available technologies to see what we can have with us to assist us, not only in quicker and more rapid fire intervention, but in the safety of our firefighters. A lot of those very historic buildings are not built to the same building standards clearly as we have now. A lot of them are timber framed, and once they become heavily involved in fire, obviously we can't commit firefighters into those buildings. So any technology we can have to assist with extinguishing those fires and protecting firefighters would be key. So I'm always happy to explore new technologies and look at new toys.
Thanks. Well, I think the Houses of Parliament probably fall into that category. And also, just while on new kit, when we were in Lincolnshire, we saw a couple of pieces of new kit there, the lance and the fan thing, I forgot what it's called. Where have we got to with those?
Those are both under evaluation as part of that trial. So the question I said earlier about looking at new technologies, you know, it is very important to make sure that London Fire Brigade are looking at every type of new kit and technology. What we want to do with some of those, sometimes there are some really quirky things that come out that we will have a look at but aren't sort of fully developed as ideas yet. But obviously we want to make sure that those resources that are available are looked at and factored into our planning process for kit replacement.
Thank you. And now we move on to Leonie and Fire Safety and Building Regs Post Grenfell.
Thank you, Andrew. I mean, you touched on this a bit, but I just wondered, Commissioner, if you could outline in what ways the Brigade's regulation and enforcement work has changed post Grenfell.
Obviously, one of the key areas we focused on is our detailed response to approved document B, We think that this is absolutely, you know, at the moment we think there's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make some really key changes to fire safety regulation, and that we want to make sure that the work that we have been doing as London Fire Brigade, you know, for a number of years in looking at a lot of these areas is now reinforced. You know, we have got officers seconded into the Home Office for the National Fire Chiefs Council, and they're working to assist with fire safety consultations, and specifically we've got them working with government in response to the Hackett review as well. So we want to make sure that we are leading those changes. You know, we've continued to be very vocal about approved document B. We supplied a very detailed response to that. We're continuing obviously to promote the use of automatic fire suppression systems, including sprinklers, one of the tools of a comprehensive range of fire safety measures that we think are essential, and also ensuring that responsible people consider factors such as vulnerability of buildings and of the complexity of the buildings, not just about height of buildings. I think for a long time there's been a lot of focus on the height of a building, but complexity of buildings plays a key part. Obviously, the key change in legislation that we're looking at the moment are the addendum to Housing Health and Safety Rating System, which the government announced at the end of November that local authorities will get a full backing about in carrying out emergency work in response to cladding, and obviously the response recently around assisting with private buildings and response to that. You know, as far as I'm concerned, it's the 2-year anniversary coming up very soon, and I think it's quite shocking the amount of buildings that still have cladding on them. And we think that, you know, we want to make sure that the focus does not get taken away from that, and that we need to make sure that, you know, we apply every pressure where we can to ensure, because at the moment those buildings, you know, are still very much at risk. So it's very much about how that's being responded to and the work we're doing with that. We've also been looking at the Housing and Planning Act and the range of options to tackle rogue landlords, which also include a number of penalties, financial penalties that tend to focus people's minds. And, you know, the range of different enforcement work that we've been taking part in, not only around care homes and high-rise, but say the work we're doing now around heritage sites, which we feel is really important. And I think Notre Dame brought that very clearly into focus, that people were very concerned about the risk to our heritage sites in London.
So that's actually quite a long list. Perhaps I could start with you, Commissioner, and then perhaps bring in the Deputy Mayor as well. How do you feel that the London Fire Brigade is coping with all of these mainly additional demands following Grenfell, and also in responding to Hackett and all these other building safety reviews?
So I think one of the things that we are very positive about is welcoming a lot of these reviews, and we welcome the outcome of the Hackett review because we think this is the opportunity to make some very key changes. You know, but we think that we definitely need support around the area of highlighting the importance of skills and the, you know, the lack of skills in the sector, and the problem we have about recruiting into those levels of skills, specifically against the fact that private sector are paying considerably higher, you know, levies for people with those skills, and it's a very, you know, it's not a skill set you can acquire overnight. I think we welcome the clearer definitions about who's responsible under fire safety legislation, but we also think it's very important that we support increasing the role of the fire service in the safety of buildings, and the fact that not just on an advice capability, but that actually there is some teeth behind that. So I think that, you know, at the moment I would say that my fire safety team are hugely stretched in the amount of work they've got. And I think it's fair to say, as Deputy Mayor said, that for a long time fire safety as well has been seen as one of those areas where it's just been ignored predominantly, you know, seen as some sort of sideline. But now it's absolutely at the front of everything we're doing, because the recognition about making people safe before a fire happens, that's really in sharp focus now, and we don't want to lose that opportunity. But it is an increased burden on us. It does mean that, you know, we've got our teams working on increasingly complex projects, and numbers of those, and making sure, one of the things for me is about making sure we look after those people, because it would be very easy for them to step sideways into a much higher paid job in the private sector, but luckily the people we have are very dedicated and very committed to the people of London and working for London Fire Brigade.
So coping, busy but stretched. Is there anything that you'd like to add to?
No, I don't think there's anything else to add to that really, apart from the fact that one would have hoped that after this length of time, it's almost 2 years since the Grenfell Tower, it's just over a year since the Hackett review, that we would have seen more progress. I'd also say that I think in terms of the fire safety team, we'd have also probably if you'd asked us this 18 months ago, assumed that their workload might be sort of slowing down a bit in terms of the amount of work, and it really isn't. I mean, if you consider that we've got an additional whole range of cladding that's being tested now, this is inevitably going to end up back on their desks at some point, and there is only a limit to what those individuals do. And as the Commissioner said, there are very attractive packages out there, although I hope none of the people from the team that we don't want to leave are watching this being covered. I think there's a key role for government at every single level around making sure that there's opportunities for people to get those skills, because obviously the pipeline will take some time. I think that some of the fire engineers, it takes years for the training, so I think that this isn't something that can happen overnight. A lot of the skills you need end up being for the sort of the more senior roles, sort of degree level skills. So this is quite a costly and time intensive process, and I think that we do need investment in this. The Brigade does invest in its own people in terms of putting them through training, but I think that it's a drop in the ocean compared to what is needed longer term, because this area of work of any fire brigade is clearly not going to get less. It is going to get more significant, and I think that we need to have an honest conversation at every level of government about how we make sure that you get those skills in place, and you make sure that people understand what an attractive and interesting career it can be for people in those roles in the public sector.
So one of the things that you've also been alluding to throughout the discussion has been the need to be working in conjunction with others, so it's not just something that affects the Brigade in terms of negotiations with the Home Office. You've just mentioned changes to the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, so that also presumably involves MCHLG or whatever alphabeti spaghetti they're currently going under. So are you working effectively with other partners, Homes England, London councils, the LGA? Are they also pressing for these changes? Because obviously local authorities have a massive role here, as well as the brigades across the country, and also housing providers, which not all of whom are local authorities.
So we have got undertaking wide-ranging opportunities about engaging with partners. We're working very closely with London councils to provide technical fire safety advice and liaison major consultations. We remain a standing member of the London Housing Directors Fire Safety Group and Fire Safety Steering Group as forums. They provide opportunities for us to share information and provide updates on the current state of our high-rise task force. Obviously that's been established since the week after Grenfell, and that's now conducted a total of 1,236 visits. So that's been a really key piece of work. So it is important to us that we continue working with partners, not only to ensure that we're providing that information and support to them, but we make sure we're reaching out to every angle to ensure that we are accessing opportunities both to influence people and to provide education.
So you just briefly mentioned the situation with cladding and the fact that the workload has not really declined. I think we know that there's now further tests being conducted on non-ACM cladding, and it seems quite likely some of it has already failed. It looks as though more may fail. Do we actually have any kind of estimate of the number of buildings that are likely to be affected in London and what the eventual workload is going to be?
No, I mean, that's how long is a piece of string. I mean, it's quite... So, as you know, there are 27 new types of cladding that have undertaken testing at the moment. We do anticipate that a number of those will require interventions and new buildings being identified for us to visit, which obviously will increase the load at the moment. We've currently got 316 buildings identified with ACM cladding. We expect that number to increase hugely once the 27 new types of cladding. We've got 200 buildings who've got simultaneous evacuation in place at the moment. That level could increase as well. Obviously, the focus has been on high-rise buildings, but that we all know that cladding is not just on high-rise buildings, and it's about how we work going forward. And we know that the workload will only continue to increase, and it is about us responding and being able to provide that support and information to responsible people to ensure that they are taking the steps to ensure that the fire safety provisions within those buildings are appropriate and are measured, and make sure they've got the right risk assessments in place.
Now, you talked about also needing to have the amount of resources in place to deal with this workload, which is not going to decline. The government announced very recently a fund of £200 million for fixing the situation with ACM cladding on privately owned tower blocks. Now, that's only going to be open for applications for a very, very short period of time. My maths is not brilliant, but 200 million doesn't actually sound like a great deal of money to me. Is the LFB or the GLA going to be planning some work to kind of publicise the fact, in case anyone's not noticed that it's available, to make sure that blocks in London, that the owners apply in time?
Sorry, I think that the GLA obviously has been managing the social sector ACM cladding remediation fund. I'm not sure it's clear who's going to be administering that, but I would think that it is highly likely that the GLA would do some promotion around it, but I can check and see exactly what's planned.
Could we find out about that? Because
Yeah.
I would really hate us to miss out on anything that is available, even if...
I can assure you that if there is money available, that the GLA can help distribute. I mean, if they use the same model as they did before, they've done the previous one through the GLA, but we can check what the status of that is, and actually over coming days and weeks it might become more clear.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to mention sprinklers as well. The Leaseholder Advisory Service, promoted by the government, has been reported to be telling leaseholders that they are individually liable for the costs of interim fire measures, and also potentially, we don't know yet because there's still some cases that are at first tier tribunal and not yet resolved, that they may also be need to be responsible for the cost of installing sprinklers inside their own flats. Do you have any further information on whether or not this is something that leaseholders are paying for, and is this really appropriate, or is this something that building owners should be funding for the interim fire measures that are in place while the situation with potential for putting in sprinklers is resolved?
I think it's varied, so it's quite clear that some building owners have funded the sprinklers, and for example in the borough I live in, Croydon, and in I think there's at least 2 other boroughs in London, the council has funded it, including for leaseholders. There is a wider issue over the whole issue around rights of leaseholders and responsibilities of leaseholders, and I think that, as you say, this is sort of going through the courts, and I think that there's clear views of councils that the work needs to be done, and somebody needs to find the money. Ideally, in my view, the government would have come up with money to undertake this work and allowed a discussion on who paid and how much afterwards, rather than people having to argue before vital safety work was undertaken.
Yes, because I think going through the courts is delaying it,
Yeah, it is.
and then there's interim measures being implemented. We've heard about some people who are living in residential tower blocks where they don't actually want to have to pay for the interim measures, so they're actually doing the sort of waking watches themselves. Are you aware that that is happening, and do you think that's suitable at all?
I'm not aware that's happening, and
Do you think that would pass safety standards if it does emerge that people are trying to do that for themselves?
I would say it would depend on the training and the resource available, and the making sure that the responsible people have done a risk assessment against that. So that would be very much down to the person who's responsible for the building to ensure that those people have the sufficient training and equipment available to, not only to maintain the waking watch, but to be able to alert residents in the event of a fire.
Can I suggest that this is something that we might be able to go back and identify whether this is something that the fire brigades observed and report back to the committee?
Okay, thank you. That would be very helpful. And then finally, obviously with Hackett having come out a year ago, we've not yet really seen the changes through. How is the LFB's role as a fire and rescue service and the GLA's role as a developer and planning regulator changing as a result of that review, and how do you see that developing?
So obviously we were very keen and instrumental in providing professional advice and support to the Hackett Review because of the importance of it. So, you know, although it was an additional draw on our resource for our professional fire safety team, that we, you know, it was very key that we ensured that was supplied, and we welcome the outcome of the Hackett Review. We think there is further work to be done, obviously, in adopting a lot of the recommendations from that review, and we are continuing to lobby to make sure that there is, you know, sufficient funding in place. So we are urging the government to make sure that, you know, where there are funding issues there, where we need to plug gaps in skills sectors, where we need to work closely, that there is that resource in place for it. You know, we also agree that simply banning ACM cladding is not going to resolve the issue, and that might take away from the actually proper testing regimes before any of these products are applied to a building. So London Fire Brigade will continue to be, you know, at the front and centre of supporting the recommendations and lobbying for further developments.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Are you persuaded that sufficient changes have taken place in terms of the plans for disasters to prevent the chaos that ensued in the immediate aftermath of Grenfell?
So obviously, whilst it's not appropriate to comment on anything pertinent to Grenfell while the inquiry has yet to carry on with its investigations and reach the phase 1 conclusion, then obviously the far deeper investigations into phase 2. What I would say is London Fire Brigade are ensuring that we are preparing, that we are a learning organisation, and we are making sure that we are fit for purpose and able to respond to any incident in London. And as soon as any recommendations come to light from the review, London Fire Brigade will, of course, adopt those recommendations and respond to those in a timely fashion.
Thank you.
Just a couple of thoughts from me. On the testing that the government's doing on non-ACM cladding, am I right in saying that they're not testing the smoke and emissions from that going up? And is it not the case that if people are going to be injured or die in a fire, it's more likely to get it from smoke inhalation than the flames?
I'm not cited on the detail of the testing they're doing. I know it's only commenced yet and it hasn't been reporting on it. I can get that detail for you, but yes, as you're fully aware, people are as well, even more likely to die from the products of the fire than they are from direct contact with fire themselves. Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you about was the joint inspection teams, which were announced a year ago, June 2018, of the fire brigades, local authorities and the HSE, setting up a multidisciplinary task force to supervise or oversee, or whatever the word is, the removal of dangerous cladding on high-rise. Apparently the law finally came into force in January this year, but the thing's still not up and running. I had a mayor's question answered about this, which said it should be up and running in the next couple of months. I mean, 2 years on, it is pretty awful. It's not happened so far. But can you give us an idea when those 2 months is likely to be up?
I don't have the detail of that at the moment. We are not, you know, we are actively supporting that. We are really keen on those joint task forces, and we're working fully to support that starting to happen. So I can get Dan Daly to provide you a more detailed response.
Thank you. A couple of questions on the budget now. Can you give us an update on the movement in the capital and revenue budget?
Yeah, okay, so our out-term position on the revenue budget is for an underspend of just over 4.5 million at 1.1%. We will have external audit. The final accounts will be approved by the LFC by myself on the 31st of July. There's a number of additional underspends, 1.7 since the last report. They're mainly due to a number of factors involving property, some of those due to additional rental income, the receipt of the sale of Southwark Fire Station, and a reduction in income from insurance companies under the Metropolitan Fire Brigade Act. We've also had a revised forecast on our building maintenance due to a reduction in the forecast spending on maintenance contracts due to the backlog of works. We've had a number of areas we wanted to improve on the estate. That's been far slower than we would have liked. We've also had a lower than expected spend against training and professional development due to the way our firefighter apprenticeship training costs are working, and we've also had an increase in the underspend on property rates following successful appeal in this quarter. We've also had professional services due to revised costs for prosecution case and inquest matters. That some of those underspends are offset by an increase in the operational staff following an updated forecast for pay awards and telecommunications budget, mainly as a result of the Home Office catching up with the way they're billing on Firelink charges.
Okay. historically, virtually every year that I've been around doing this, we've had an underspend on the operational staff budget due to vacancies. From what you're saying, that's not the case this year.
No, so we're very
In the
pleased that
outturn.
we will have reached our, fulfilled our vacancies by the end of June. So obviously we've had the issue where we've paid for overtime to compensate to ensure we have frontline volunteers available, but I'm really pleased to report that we will have filled our vacancies.
So for the outturn for the year that's just finished, that isn't going to be an underspend?
I'm going to look to see if the detail.
Still a small underspend, but we've factored in the fact of the vacancy margin, so the underspend's much smaller than in previous years.
Okay, thank you. And then question on the reserves. You've got 75 million in reserve. How much of that is allocated to specific projects and how much is general reserve?
So do you want to...
The majority,
Yeah.
majority of that is allocated to specific things, and a large...
Sorry, how much did you say?
So we hold a minimum level of reserve of 3.5%, which is around 14 million, and then the rest is spread across a number of earmarked reserves. And we've also had a strategy of building up a budget flexibility reserve, which is how we're smoothing the impact of our pressures. So that means we've got a balanced budget 1920, 2021, a smaller gap than we otherwise would have had in 21-22. So we don't actually hit a serious gap until 22-23.
Okay, thanks. What preparations are you making for the comprehensive spending review later this year?
I think the Brigade's been undertaking a lot of work on the comprehensive spending review, contributing to a piece of work being done with the Home Office by the LGA and by the National Fire Chiefs Council. And I think that I think the work that's been done in terms of putting case studies in to demonstrate what the Brigade currently spends its money on and so forth has been really valuable in basically sort of boosting that piece of work. And I think that it's been around lobbying government, and my perspective on the comprehensive spending review is that if all we're doing is saying we want to perform at the same level, we're missing the opportunity to actually work with government to try and look for the next step change in improvements in fire safety. So I think particularly around the prevention piece, particularly around sort of preventing deaths, which a large portion of which we know could ultimately have been preventable, I think that we need to look to how we do that next step change in improvement of fire safety. And so those are the discussions that I've been having through my role at the LGA with the Home Office.
Okay. And last question from me about the HMI CFRS inspections, because you just had the first tranche come out. What's your initial reaction to what they've had to say?
So obviously we've had no feedback yet because they've just been in the discovery phase. The feedback we've had from our staff who have been past that phase is that they have found it to be a really engaging and open process that has enabled them to contribute fully and to be very open with the inspectors. They were surprised at the level of engagement, and one of the things that they have fed back is that they'd wish they'd had more time, a lot of them especially to sell the work they're doing in their local areas. So I think that, you know, we've worked, the team we have internally have worked really hard because it's a really big ask. The HMRC FRS have not inspected obviously such a big fire and rescue service, and that they want to make sure that they are inspecting us on the same scale and proportion as they have everyone else. That has meant so many planned station visits that although they're in the first discovery phase now, that is part of the information collecting they'll use for the main phase when they come in July. It's been a really interesting logistical task planning the visits out to areas, to different teams and different fire stations. But, you know, overwhelmingly, the feedback we've had from our staff has been one of positivity, and they've felt they've been able to fully contribute to the visits. So obviously we're looking forward to the next stage of them coming in, where we'll be doing the strategic briefing and then further visits. And where they've come back with additional requests, we've been able to facilitate those already. So we're working very closely to make sure that we are trying to provide ourselves in the very best light possible.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that's it, unless anyone's got anything else. No? Well, thank you both for coming, and thanks for your backup team. Sorry Sue Ellison Bunce didn't have to do anything, but there you go.
She's not.
But you're not.
They look like backup singers with a microphone, don't they? Maybe the 3 degrees?
Let them sing.
Yeah. Okay, so can we note the report in today's discussion?
Noted.
And can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with group lead members to agree any output from the meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. We've now got a few other bits and pieces. Item 9, reserve strategy and medium-term financial plan for the London Fire Commissioner. Can we review the reserve strategy and medium-term financial plan for the London Fire Commissioner? And can we agree to note the reserve strategy and medium-term financial plan for the London Fire Commissioner? This form the recommendations of the Mayor of London in accordance with section 3271 of the Policing and Crime Act, Act 2017. Thank you. And then Fire Resilience Emergency Planning Committee work programme. Can we note the work programme? And date of next meeting is the 18th of July at 2:30 in the Chamber. And there is no other urgent business. Thank you.
Thank you.